Good morning, everybody. Today is Wednesday, April 3rd, 2024. My name is Lenine Livingston. I'm the Public Information Officer for the Fairbanks North Star Borough. I'd like to recognize some distinguished guests that we have in attendance with us today. Fairbanks North Star Borough School District Superintendent, Mr. Luke Meinert. I know I saw him here. There you are, sir. Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Andy DeGraw. Thank you for being here. President and CEO of Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation, Mr. Jomo Stewart. Thank you for being here, as well as several of our Fairbanks North Star Borough directors and staff are in attendance today. We are recording this live address from the Fairbanks North Star Borough Juanita Helms Administration Center in the Mona Lisa Drexler Assembly Chambers. With me today running the slide deck is our Chief of Staff, Mr. Jim Williams, and we also have our Deputy Chief of Staff, Mr. Kuba Genda here today. I would now like to introduce Borough Mayor Bryce Ward to give the live address for the state of the borough. Mayor Ward.
Thank you, Lenine, and thank you everyone for being here today. We're going to go over a few things in our agenda. We've got accomplishments from this last year, what we've achieved over the last fiscal year. We're going to go over the vision and goals of the Fairbanks North Star Borough, what we've really been focusing a lot of our energy on over the last few years. Talk about the budget principles in which the budget was developed for FY25. We're going to go over major concerns for this upcoming year, and then we're going to wrap things up. So it's an emotional time for me, with this being my last budget, my last State of the Borough for presentation, but I'm happy to be here and provide this update to the community. So talk about our highlights for this last year, some of the things that we've accomplished. We've done a number of capital projects. I was able to actually just go do a tour of our Nolwein Library updates, which will be coming live here in the next few months. I'm very excited about that. We have completion of our transit garage, which has been many, many years in the making. That'll be going live this summer as well, updating that facility, building a brand new facility. We had completed our Pioneer Park bathroom replacement project, which was started a number of years ago. Providing heated year-round bathrooms in Pioneer Park. We had a number of projects at the Carlson Center to include the ventilation improvement project, assembly chambers improvement project. As you can see here, we've updated the chambers, added some technology. Ground and field turf replacement. So if you've been out at the Gold Panners Stadium, you've noticed that we've got some new turf out there, much needed. As well as doing some maintenance backflow preventer work throughout the entire borough. So that includes our school district facilities as well as our other borough facilities. Last year we were designated as a Great American Defense Community, great accomplishment for the Fairbanks North Star Borough. We completed our housing tax incentive program. That 2-year program came to a close. We wrapped out with about 125 units being approved through that program. And we came up with a fix to the illegal lots issue that we've been dealing with here in the Fairbanks North Star Borough. Some other successes, we were very successful with our TAG grant. This is our Targeted Airshed Grant application with the state of Alaska. We're receiving close to $10 million for oil to gas conversion, as well as expansion of the natural gas utility system in the North Pole area. Our capital improvement program went through its 3rd biennial update. So this is a program that was put into effect one of my first years in office. And we've seen some tremendous benefit from this program. We had the F-16s were redesignated as a combat-coded squadron out at Eielson Air Force Base, and this is significant. They've been essentially a training aircraft for a number of years. This comes with mission adjustments, if you will, for Eielson Air Force Base as we talk about those aircraft being used in the Homeland Defense mission here in Alaska and across the world. We completed the Leading the Borough series, so if you're interested in knowing a little bit about the history of your previous mayors and previous leaders of the Fairbanks North Star Borough, that is available on our website. I encourage you to check that out. A great resource for borough residents and our young people. And we've seen a significant impact to the economy from North Slope projects. The Willow project is having a very positive impact in the Fairbanks North Star Borough. We've seen a lot of work happening. We've got a lot of folks that are working up on the slope right now. And we've had a lot of military-related construction. So both at Eielson and Fort Wainwright, we did have the State of the Borough, or State of the Garrison, just this last, was it 2 days ago, at the chamber luncheon. where we had an update on the number of projects that are happening there for our soldiers. We do have some challenges though, and I think it's important to address these as we talk about our future for the community. We've had a large outmigration in Alaska, but also in Fairbanks of our working age people and families. That 25 to 45 year age group is seeing an outmigration, and that's something that should be concerning to us as a community. Those are the folks that are out there typically working in the workforce, and we're seeing an outmigration. We are seeing a large increase, if you will, for those that are 45 and plus. So Fairbanks is a very desirable place to be if you're approaching the more senior years. And so I think these are important though as we talk about changes in the demographic, because we're certainly seeing them here at the local level. Construction overall, we've had some significant challenges with cost. Labor is a big piece of that, materials are a big piece of that, as well as our construction season. We have a challenge, I think, with our diversity of our tax base. There's certainly been lots of conversation over the last year about this. And a majority of our borough government, majority of our municipal services are provided through property tax. And so when we talk about diversity, we talk about things like sales tax and other resources that are used to pay for state for local government. We definitely have some challenges, and I think this is something that we've known for a number of years, but we're certainly seeing with more acuteness here recently. Challenges as well as the state education system. So we are seeing real implications to this, and I appreciate our superintendent and chief financial officer from the school district being here today because they are certainly impacting the borough budget and they're impacting services and our residents around the borough as well as around the state. Also, our air quality continues to be a challenge for us. So we've got the serious non-attainment, partial approval, partial disapproval. We're going through that right now. What it means is a conformity freeze for our transportation plan. So as we continue to move down this timeline, we have not hit sanctions yet, but we do need to continue to make sure that this is a high priority for the Fairbanks North Star Borough. It is significantly one of our biggest challenges as we look to the future in the next few years if we cannot get ourselves into that federal attainment status. Let's talk about goals and vision. So who are we? The Fairbanks North Star Borough is your municipality. We invest your resources through services that improve the quality of life here in the Fairbanks North Star Borough so our residents can thrive. And we've been doing that for a number of years, since the early 60s. We have a mission statement here, serve, lead, thrive. And I'd like to take this moment to share a little video we put together. Actually, it was a number of years ago. It was pre-COVID, if that jogs anyone's memory, but I'd like to share this with you at this time.
The Fairbanks North Star Borough is the place we call home. For some of us, we landed here by happenstance. For others, we came here on orders. And others still sought out this place in search of adventure. Regardless of how we got here, we chose to stay for similar reasons. Some say it's the cold weather and warm people, or the fact that if you get a flat tire or go in the ditch, before you get out of your car, someone will be there to help you. Others will say it's the access to the outdoors and passion for personal freedoms. Either way you see it, there is something that sets the interior apart from the rest of the world, and that is something worth encouraging and promoting. As a community, there are values that define us, that give us motivation and meaning. When I think of our community, I see the words serve, lead, thrive. Serve, to serve others through act or action. Lead, to be at the front, to give an example for others to follow. Thrive, to grow, to flourish, to prosper in all conditions. These values define us. They guide our interactions at the store, in school, at work, and with our families. I challenge you to serve, lead, thrive today.
All right, and that's available on our website if you want to share that with any of your friends on social media. So who are we? As I mentioned, the Fairbanks North Star Borough is your municipality. We take your resources, taxpayer dollars, and we invest those back into the community through a variety of different services. Some of those services include our libraries, pools, parks and recreation, solid waste delivery services, community planning, public transportation, emergency services, and of course, education. In the last 5 years, we've focused on the following 5 categories of focus for the administration and for the borough. We've focused on forging strong military connections, developing cleaner and cheaper energy solutions, developing a diversified and resilient economy, providing excellence in governance, and promoting healthy environments and homes. And we've been, I think, doing a good job on a lot of those fronts. As we talk about our vision and goals, we really have a big opportunity in front of us. We've got some big challenges too. We have to continue to prepare for the future, and continue to equip ourselves to be in control of our own destiny. Historically, we have been, right now we're at a crossroads. Historically, the state has been a very big part of our community, providing resources through state revenue sharing, providing resources through school construction debt aid, as well as school funding and capital projects. The state of Alaska, for a number of different reasons, has been reducing how much it provides to these different programs and how much comes to the local level. And we've seen that on a number of fronts. State revenue sharing is down significantly from where it was a decade ago. School debt construction has been on, there's been a moratorium for new projects for almost a decade now. School funding has been flat for the last decade, as well as our capital projects. We've seen, at least my time in office, no funding from the legislature to help with capital projects. And I would say, as we talk about the future, we have to be prepared to be able to be picking up more and more of the tab if we want to continue to have these same level of services here at the Fairbanks North Star Borough. As we talk about the development of the FY25 budget, it was developed with a few guiding principles, and these are really important as we talk about the decisions that we had to make this last year, or for this upcoming year. One is stability in government services. The other is sustainability of programming and operations, cost containment of our programs, promotion of development and quality construction, development of efficiencies to streamline our government processes, and focusing on recapitalizing our old buildings and our deferred maintenance. I'd also like to draw attention to one of our fiscal policies. This has been a fiscal policy in the borough budget for a number of years. This is Section A. All current operating expenditures are to be paid for from current and excess revenue. The borough will avoid budgetary and accounting procedures that balance the current budget at the expense of meeting future years' obligations. The use of one-time revenue for ongoing operations will not be encouraged. That's page 43 of the FY25 budget. So let's talk about some of the highlights, some of the big numbers that I think folks are interested in the budget proposal. The FY25 recommended comprehensive budget, this includes all of our 120 taxing jurisdictions, is $193,329,902. It reflects an increase of 5.5% over the FY24 budget. And again, as I mentioned, that's across all taxing jurisdictions. If you look at it from the revised budget, so this is after all the amendments that have occurred throughout the last fiscal year, it's about a 2.6% increase over the revised 24 budget. The FY25 recommended area-wide budget, so this is just your typical services that you think of when you think of the Fairbanks North Star Borough. It's your pools, your parks, your education, grew by $7.7 million. It is about, that includes, if you will, the $4 million supplemental, bringing that back as taxed revenue for the education system. If you back that out, the increase that we saw on the FY25 recommended area-wide budget was about 2.5%, or about $3.7 million. And again, that accounts for that $4 million increase. I'll talk about that here in a minute for education. This results in an estimated area-wide mill rate of 10.679697 mills, an increase of 0.256 mills from the prior year. This does tax to the tax revenue cap, so there's no capacity to generate any additional revenue through taxes. It contributes $11,970,000 to the CIPMR as required by code, and assumes an increase to the school district for tax revenue from $50 million to $54 million. Some of our cost drivers this year, wages and benefits, continue to be a big cost for the work that we do here at the Fairbanks North Star Borough. Digital security and licensing continues to be a big impact to the Fairbanks North Star Borough. Training and certification for our EMS providers. Utilities, including heat, electricity, water, sewer. Fuel for our vehicles and equipment, as well as our service contracts. Some changes that you'll see in the FY25 budget. These are the big changes. There's some other small ones, if you will. One, we made some changes in the library. We added an FTE, but no belly buttons or no people. This is taking some of our part-time positions and making them full-time. This is in support of the bookmobile that provides services to our rural areas of the Fairbanks North Star Borough. We have changes to the Division of Natural Resources. We're adding 2 FTE and a perm term position. This is to help in land development and land acquisition from the state of Alaska. Currently, the borough has 15,000 acres of land that has not been deeded to the Fairbanks North Star Borough. These positions will help work with the Department of Natural Resources at the state to get full title to those lands and get those lands into development. Parks and Recreation, we're consolidating 4 FTE, creating 4 FTE positions by reducing our temporary positions. We have a number of those positions that have been historically hard to fill, and so we're reducing that temporary line in the budget and then increasing the full-time so we can get those positions filled to do that important work. It does assume a COLA of 3.5% based on the negotiations that we have. We have no agreement currently with our 3 bargaining units, but we are working to that end and wanted to make sure that we had a number in the budget that we could use that we didn't have to plug later. And so as we talk about implications to the tax base, we talk about the cost, we wanted to make sure we had that number in the budget. So it does account for a COLA of 3.5% and our typical step increases that we have in our contracts. It does make some changes to our multi-year projects, changing some of those to reserves, as well as modifying or combining some of those programs to give them greater flexibility, if you will, with what they can be used for. Let's talk capital projects in the CIPMR. Since the inception of the new capital improvement program and process, the borough has appropriated $101.5 million in projects. Of that, 67% of those appropriations have come from the local tax base. These are your property taxpayer dollars going to work. The remaining 33% have been leveraged to maximize grants, donations, sponsorships, and using excess bond proceeds. So that's a great result. It's a 3 to 1, 2 to 3. So 30% match for the work that we're doing through the capital improvement program. And as we talk about over the last 5 years, that's pretty significant to think that we as a local community have put that much money together towards deferred maintenance, recapitalizing our assets. Some of the FY25 major construction projects, we've got the trail program. This is an ongoing program that we've had for a number of years. It's $350,000. We've got our Park a Year program at $500,000. We've also got the animal shelter construction phase increase. This is to get that project to construction of $16 million. Includes various project starts to include the pickleball court planning, Birch Hill multipurpose building replacement design, Big Dipper structural repairs, Carlson Center ADA compliance, as well as the indoor playground design at the Carlson Center. Let's talk about education, a little bit of the elephant in the room. Board of Education has requested $64.2 million in local contribution from the Fairbanks North Star Borough. Last year, the Board of Education requested $59 million, so this is an increase over the prior year request. In FY24, I recommended to the Assembly $55.5 million in local education funding. In FY25, the Assembly passed a budget with $50 million in education funding, and then later amended that budget to include a supplemental of $4 million to bring that total up to $54 million. The challenge that we run into when we talk about development of this year's budget is that we only taxed for $50 million in local contribution to education last year, and the tax cap resets every year based on the budgeted amount for that year. So it leaves us with the inability to bring back, if you will, that $4 million inside of the tax cap. The recommended budget that I have this year from the local contribution, is $54 million. That brings back the $4 million supplemental in essentially tax revenue. And it leaves a $10.2 million hole between what I have in my recommended budget and what the district has requested in their budget for the Fairbanks North Star Borough. To balance the budget, we do have a draw of $3.5 million from the fund balance. This will help provide that $54 million in local education. And as I mentioned earlier, we are taxed to the cap with this budget. And this recommended budget does not account for any increases that should occur in the May 7th tax cap election. Should it be approved by the voters, that would have to be, that change would have to be made by the Assembly in their budget deliberations. It is not accounted for in this operational budget. So questions on how we got here with education funding. I did talk about the challenge that we have for the ability to generate those revenues. Last year being taxed at $54 million, but I want to go over some of the details. And I think the most important challenge to address here when we talk about education funding is that really the bulk of this responsibility lies at the feet of the state of Alaska. The state of Alaska is a majority funder of our education system. There's constitutional obligations for that. And essentially, they've been flat funding our education system for a number of years. And that has put significant pressure on our district, on our local community. And that cost shift that occurs is something that we've been feeling as well as local taxpayers. But there were also some, when we talk about things that we can control, last year there were some things that were done in the budget that made this year's development of the budget that much more difficult. So last year, reductions were made in committee over the recommended budget. I talked earlier about my recommended budget last year was $55.5 million to education funding. On April 15th, the Finance Committee reduced, this is April 15th of 2023, the Finance Committee reduced the taxes collected for school debt by $3.1 million. This was an effort to help bring down the mill rate last year, but that also reduced our ability to generate that revenue because, again, it was taken out of taxes, which means that we didn't generate those taxes last year, which means you cannot generate those taxes in this year under the tax cap formula. On April 22nd, 2023, so between the 15th and the 22nd, there was the minimum funding resolution that came before the Assembly. They set that at $50 million, and then on April 22nd of 2023, the Finance Committee reduced the taxes collected for local education by $5.5 million. So that brought that local contribution down to $50 million. If you look at where a lot of our loss in the ability to generate taxes and revenue from last year to this year, if you add those two up, that's $8.6 million that we lost in the ability to generate revenue under the tax cap formula because we did not generate those taxes in this current fiscal year. So that's a big piece as we talk about some of the big challenges that we see this year as to our ability to generate revenue within the tax cap. As we talk about the area-wide mill rate, we are at historic lows. There is a slight increase, as I mentioned, a 256 mil increase from the prior year budget that does tax us to the cap, but we're still well below anything that we've had in the last 20 years as far as the mill rate is concerned, and I think significantly provides some of the challenges that we've talked about here with the ability to generate those revenues. Talk about property tax revenue. So in 2022, the borough generated $121 million in property tax revenue. Our proposed budget for FY25 only is able to generate $112 million in revenue. Again, this is not taking into consideration anything that may happen on May 7th with the tax cap election. But over the last few years, our ability to generate revenue has actually been significantly impacted. Some of that has been that we've seen additional revenue come in through other sources, primarily for interest earnings, but then also we drove down the mill rate last year with a number of the changes that were made at the Finance Committee and then ultimately adopted by the Borough Assembly. I'll note that FY24 was one of the lowest years that we've seen in a number of years for taxes generated at $105 million. We had not seen levels that low since 2018 as far as property tax revenue that was generated through our taxes. Let's talk about our contribution to CIPMR. This has been something that the Assembly did a number of years ago to change the requirement and code that the Borough Mayor's recommended budget has to include 10% of revenue that goes to Capital Improvement Maintenance Reserve, the Capital Improvement Maintenance Reserve. I'm happy to say that we do meet that requirement within this budget. That is down a little bit over prior years because our ability to generate revenue has been down, but it puts us just under $12 million going into the capital fund. Talk about our budget timeline. So we're kicking this off. This is what we've typically done with the State of the Borough. We'll release the budget today. That goes out at 1 o'clock. And then we go into our budget committee hearings. So if the public is interested in attending, those are going to be held here in the Mona Lisa Drexler Chambers at the Borough Assembly, or the Borough Juanita Helms Administration Center. You're welcome to attend basically all day Saturday. Your assembly members and directors will be here going over the budget starting not this weekend, but next weekend. And then we move right into our budget deliberations in May with the Assembly, with the public hearing scheduled for the borough budget on May 16th. If you're interested in providing comment, you can provide comment under under the, I think, citizens comment sections B in the Assembly schedule at any time between now and then. But we do have that specific public hearing scheduled for the budget on May 16th. So we'll go to wrap this thing up in our conclusion. So the borough, as I mentioned, is here to provide services. We're not just here for fun. There's a purpose and a reason why the borough exists. And I would say we've done, and our department and directors and staff have done a remarkable job focusing on rebuilding, repairing our assets, and really focusing on delivery of our services to our borough residents. And our staff should be complimented on the work that they've done, especially in some challenging times. Our borough services are necessary to provide a thriving community, whether it be our education system, our waste management delivery and containment system, landfill. We talk about our pools, our parks and recreation, our library services. These are all functions that are needed for a community to thrive. And we hear that pretty continually through our communications with our military partners and through our conversations with the community. And I want to leave you with a couple of quotes here. One is we talk about the value that we provide to the borough. There is an exchange that occurs. We collect taxes. Those taxes are then invested in services for you and the community. So individuals may not individually benefit from all of those services, but as a community, they serve to stand and support support the community that we have and that we choose to live in. The ad man, Bill Burnock, said, "A value isn't a value unless it costs you something." And I think that's significant. If you're willing to pay for it, you're willing to scrutinize and pay attention to those different details, and that's what we're doing here with our budget this year. We're talking about the value that we provide, and we're talking about the resources that are needed to provide that value. If we value these things that we provide here at the Fairbanks North Star Borough, we have to accept that they're going to cost us something. And one final quote from Peter Drucker, longtime marketing business person, is this: "The relevant question is not simply what shall we do tomorrow, but rather what shall we do today in order to prepare for tomorrow." And I think this budget really speaks to that. There's been a lot of discussion about what we can do this year to meet our operational needs. I talked about our fiscal policy earlier. We can certainly make some decisions today that will solve our problems today, but they will make our tomorrow very difficult. And so as we talk about the future of the community, we talk about the services that we provide, we talk about how we fund those things, we have to keep the long-term focus on our future. We have to look at what tomorrow will bring and how we're setting ourselves up for success in that avenue. We've got a lot of really great examples of how we've done that. I think the capital improvement program is one of those. And so we need to continue to take that mindset into the future. And I encourage the Assembly, I encourage the community to think about that as we go through our budget process this year. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to pay attention to the state of the borough, to be here to talk about our upcoming budget. It will be going live today on our website, 1 p.m. If you want to download that, as well as copies of this presentation will be made available on the website. And I'm available to do questions. I think, are we going to do that from the podium here?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So thanks for joining us, everyone.
Mayor Word, you said if there's a $10.2 million gap between what you're recommending and what the school district is asking, and the special election May 7th could cover that, but you didn't include it in your budget. It's not only going to impact education, but also long-term budget planning in all of those sectors of the borough in future years, isn't it, if the special election doesn't pass?
Yes, so as you mentioned, there is a $10 million hole in my budget between the district's request for education funding and then what's been recommended for local contribution. There's a lot of different ways that problem can be solved. One of them is the tax cap election. We did talk about, or I haven't talked about, but there are other options on the table. So as we talk about the outcome of the May 7th election, if there is Obviously, if the election moves forward, then the Assembly has the ability to generate revenue through property taxes, sales tax, et cetera. If that is not approved and there is a desire to fill that hole, then it has to come from other sources. We've talked a lot, at least in previous media engagements, about the reserves that the borough has, reserves that the school district has. There's opportunities to fill that hole with those reserves. I would highly not recommend filling that entire hole with reserves, because you don't have the ability to generate that revenue in the future. So as we talk about sustainability and the ability for us to sustainably provide the services that the borough provides, we really have to talk about how that hole is filled with some sort of sustainable source of revenue. Property tax, sales tax, I think, is the most likely outcome there, but you could also see a reduction in services. If the borough, if the tax cap election doesn't come through, we could talk about shuttering programs, services in order to fill that gap. $10 million is very significant. That would be a very big challenge for us to do without major impacts to borough services.
Closing pools?
You're talking about entire programs that would have to be shut down.
Your budget assumes a 3.5% COLA adjustment. Where's the borough at with the unions at? How far apart are the current negotiations?
Mayor, if you'll repeat the question.
Yeah, the question was, where are we at with negotiations with our collective bargaining agreements? So 3.5% is what we have currently on the table for the offer from the borough. Our bargaining units are above that, and so we're there is a percentage difference for the contract.
Patrick?
So to roll back to education funding, Mayor Ward, in initial kind of conversations with the school board this year, if I recall correctly, you told them to expect about $50 million in funding from the borough. That has moved now to 54 per your presentation today. Could you just speak to how that changed, I guess, in the last couple of months to add that $4 million?
So 54 is, I think, what I had recommended that the school board, the Board of Education, consider for development of the budget. And so 50 is what was taxed for last year. And so as we talk about the ability to actually fill the gap between the $50 million that was taxed last year and the $4 million supplemental that was provided with lapse funds last year, that's where the $50 to $54 million challenge is. We're filling that currently with fund balance, $3.5 million from fund balance in this recommended budget. As we talk about increase from there, that has to come from some other source.
You mentioned digital security and licensing was a cost driver.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
Yeah, a lot of digital software is moving to cloud-based subscription service. And so in the past, you used to be able to buy a subscription for Office or for whatever particular program. It would be good for several years. Now a lot of the providers are moving to monthly subscription service. And so we're certainly seeing that at the local level, especially for corporate enterprises such as the borough, migrating to those particular type of services. As well as we talk about digital security. Local governments are a vector for threat when it comes to folks that have ill wills, if you will, for local governments and for governments in general. So making sure that we have adequate security for our network is critical, and it costs money to do that.
Does your budget include funding for upgrading the tax assessment software?
We do have a project that's out there. We are working on redoing that project. There'll probably be a supplemental that comes out later in the year to use funding from one of our reserves to fully bring that project up to completion. So or to get it out to bid, I guess.
How badly needed is the upgrade needed?
It's certainly, definitely, it's something that we need to work on. That program is rather old. It's a good program. It's done the borough very well over the last few years, but as we talk about changes in the tax base, we talk about the fact that we have 120 taxing jurisdictions. It's a significant challenge for the program, and especially as we talk about adding additional exemptions and those type of programs. it definitely needs to be updated. So we're working to that end. We had to close out an old project, and we'll most likely have a supplemental coming to plus up that project and get it out to bid.
Patrick, and then we've got a question from a lady in the audience. We'll do one more and then we'll get to you. Thank you.
So early on in the presentation, you had talked about some of the economic impacts that the borough is seeing from the Willow project. Could you maybe speak as to how the borough is keeping tabs on those changes and maybe what they are, if there are metrics the borough is using to kind of watch this happen? Yeah, so the biggest source of revenue that we see from that project is through property tax. So oil field taxes, whether it be a module construction, if they happen in the borough and they're here during the tax collection or valuation periods at year end, December 31st, and they're taxed in the jurisdiction which they're sitting in. And so we certainly have seen some of those impacts for oil services. We've also seen just truck traffic, workers, the pipeline yard and the rail yard's been really full with pipe. And we've seen lots of our local contractors that work on the oil field have been very busy. So primary thing we track is property taxes, but outside of that, it's anecdotal observations throughout the community.
You mentioned that there is basically a 10.2 discrepancy between your proposed budget for the educational fund and the school boards. Is there any significant pools that is in the discrepancy of, or is it just kind of little bits here and there?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was the difference between the recommended budget at $54 million and the school district's requested budget at $64 million.
Yeah. Is there any significant pools that discrepancy comes from, or is it just sort of bits here and there that lead up to that 10 million?
So I think it's just operational cost. The district requested $59 million last year. There are cost drivers that impact the borough, they impact the school district, they impact all of us. And we see that, whether it be utilities, labor, materials, textbooks, equipment. I think that's some of the main drivers that we see at the district. We certainly, if the BSA adjustment doesn't occur with any kind of inflationary adjustment, then they have the same amount of money to do this, basically the same amount of things they have the same amount of money to do more with the next year, more things to do with the next year, and purchasing power is reduced. So I think that's really what we're seeing at the district is, it's been 7-8 years since there's been any major adjustment to the BSA. I think last year there was a $30 per BSA adjustment for the READS Act. And then prior to that, it's been almost 2 decades since we've seen significant adjustment in the base student allocation.
Thank you.
So, talking about air quality, the Hearst Road site in North Pole is the most consistent testing site that's fallen out of conformity. A lot of the ones in Fairbanks have seen improvement. Some of them have even been in conformity. The borough's wood stove change-out program, we've seen in recent presentations and meetings, is having a lot of success. But are there any ways that the borough can target specific sites that might need more attention for air quality than others?
Yeah, great question on what we can do to help target our resources to improve our air quality. The boroughs recently, as I mentioned in the State of the Borough, received a large targeted airshed grant for oil to gas conversions, for wood to gas, wood to oil conversions. We are certainly focusing those areas on the neighborhoods where we see the most issues, North Pole and Fairbanks included. We also were successful in a portion of the targeted airshed grant going to the gas utility, interior gas utility, which will be doing targeted development in the North Pole area. They had a survey that went out here a couple weeks or months ago where they're looking at where the interest is in the neighborhood and where they can and make those improvements. We also recently partnered with the gas utility for a congressional request through Senator Murkowski's office to do additional expansions in the Fairbanks and North Pole area, and we're hopeful that that direct appropriation will be successful in this next budget cycle.
Well, this is kind of a geeky little accounting thing, and I'll probably find out at 1 o'clock when you release the budget, but you mentioned that there's going to be some changes from multi-year projects to reserve accounts, or changes within multi-year projects. So how does that work? How do you change things to reserve accounts?
Yes, good question. So we've got a couple ordinances that are going to be coming up before the Assembly that would take some of our non-codified reserves and codify them so that they're actually listed out in the borough codes. They're easy to follow. Since my time in office, there's a number of things that the borough's done under non-codified ordinances. They can be difficult to track. We do have a major reserves tab in the budget that outlines some of the existing reserves, but not all of those are listed in the code. As we talk about the changes to multi-year, we looked at how we've used some of those multi-year programs in the past, really as more so as a reserve. So the idea is that you put money aside every year for a purchase that maybe you don't have every year, but that you have every 2 or 3 years. Or you've got a program that requires appropriations that can span fiscal years. So as we looked at that, a couple of the changes that we made, one was that we're making, I should say, is our comprehensive plan project. In the past, it was done as a project. We would put money into it every year. We're looking at changing that to a reserve. So essentially, you put money into the reserve, and then every 3 or 4 years, you're doing an update to the comprehensive plan, whether it be an area-wide plan, or as we're talking about, we're coming up on 20 years since the last comprehensive plan rewrite, so we'll be working on that here probably in the next few months. You'll see that before the Assembly. On the multi-year front, what we did is we had a number of smaller pockets of maintenance or deferred maintenance programs, and we really brought those all together. So there was an energy program, we had a deferred maintenance, we've got a compliance program. We combined those projects. They have the need to span multiple fiscal years. So if you've got a construction project that begins at this time of year in May, it may not be done by fiscal year end in June. Those multi-year programs allow you to be able to do that type of work through various different fiscal years. So it's kind of an accounting geeky stuff, but it's important as we talk about the transparency of those programs and how they're implemented.
You mentioned wrapping up the housing incentive that built up about 125 units. How is that going to affect the tax base over the next 10 years?
Yeah, so a number of those programs a number of those projects that were approved through the housing tax incentive were 10-year exemptions. There were a couple 4-year for some smaller units that were developed. Those are certainly going to have an impact. We've got to have those full projects built out. Not all of them are built out. We actually just recently approved one, so the implications of that, we're still doing analysis, and we don't necessarily know the value of those projects, full value, until they're done. But we're talking pretty significant as we talk about impact to, I would say, to the tax base. I would say you're talking of close to probably $10 million in value that's exempted each year under that program. I will say it's one of the things that's really unique, and we'll definitely do some case study on this, I think, as time goes on and we get better understanding of the values. But we had expected to see more that came through. One of the big topics of conversation that we've had with the community is that taxes are a significant challenge for development in the borough. But what we saw with that particular program was that even if we're willing to give up 10 years of exemption, or 10 years of taxes, we still didn't necessarily see this big move. 125 units is significant, but we were expecting to see much more than that under that program. What we heard from developers was that we're a challenging market. Taxes is a piece of that equation, but other more, I would say, significant challenges are cost of materials, cost of labor, our construction season. A number of the developers that talked with my office about that particular program were not used to being limited to 6 to 8 months of construction. They were used to 12-month cycles for construction, and they weren't able to make that work with their business model. So certainly going to be impacts. I think we did have positive impacts on the market. We did see some local developers that changed their model for that particular program. So we did get, I think, more than we would have gotten had we not done the program, but the full extent needs to be further analyzed.
Okay, last one. This was the State of the Borough Address, but it was basically your budget release.
Mm-hmm.
You've been mayor for 6 years. Are you going to do a kind of a retrospective analysis of your Celebrate your accomplishments?
Good question. I don't know. We've got a few months, so let's get through the budget cycle and then and see what happens. But right now we're focusing on putting together a fiscal budget for FY25. This will be a budget that I hand off to the next mayor that the borough elects, and so we want to do our best to make sure that we're doing a good job of a handoff between administrations.
Just one final question from me. When you were talking about the new full-time position within the libraries department, you said no new belly buttons, but still kind of a change in the structure of the labor. Should people in rural communities expect any changes in services with the bookmobile, or is that more of a labor housekeeping thing to just make it easier to provide the services that exist already?
Good question. So we have, with our bookmobile, we have 2 part-time positions that work, or they're partial FTEs. So they're full-time, but not full-time in hours. And so this includes an increase to allow them to be full-time in hours to expand their services to those more rural areas with the bookmobile. So folks would see some sort of increase in service there.
McCray, calling folks out here. Jello, Mr. DeGraw. All right, Mayor Ward, I think that's it.
Okay, thanks everyone. I really appreciate it.